Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Kate Hoppick. She's an internal medicine physician, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Normalizing Infertility Conversations in the Workplace. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like a lot of professional women, I kind of was postponing having or starting my family when it was the quote unquote right time. Some not through medical school, not through residency, make sure I'm married, have a good job, be steady in that job. And then all of a sudden, I find myself diagnosed with infertility. And now all of a sudden, I'm balancing a new job, going to appointments weekly, procedures monthly, hundreds of injections, blood draws, and so forth. And the balancing act of that and what that led to with kind of isolation, fear of my future, angry that this was happening to me and I thought that I had time. And I think that that emotional, physical, financial toll that it takes on women and families, I mean men of course too, but specifically on our women, is such a struggle. And I wasn't aware. I had no idea that this was something that could impact me at such a young age, so to speak, when I was in my 30s. And so suddenly I just found myself really struggling with the balancing act of all of it. And that kind of led me to where I am today with just, kind of waking up a bit and wanting to find ways to really help educate women, find ways to advocate for them, and kind of prepare them so they realize that they're not alone and that there's actions you can take and you don't have to wait until you're kind of going through all of this. We can start this conversation sooner.
Can you share some stories or anecdotes that really illustrate how challenging it was for you to go through infertility while practicing medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a couple big parts of it. I think there's a lot of shame and embarrassment that can sometimes be present, even though there's no reason for it to be. So you're often trying to balance a lot of this on your own. And fertility treatment and workups are kind of, you're at the mercy of them. You don't get to just coordinate and organize a day off. You have to do it based off of what's happening with your cycles. And so all of a sudden you might have a busy clinic, or I'm a hospitalist. So it's, I'm seeing patients, my shifts are when they are. And suddenly I'm trying to figure out, okay, I need to get my blood drawn, do ultrasounds. Maybe I have a procedure that has to happen, and I'm trying to do that before work, during lunch, after, trading shifts. And at the time when I was early in my journey, I wasn't really telling people about it. So I was trying to balance all of that on my own. Ultimately, I opened up to my colleagues, which was a huge relief for me. Not everyone feels comfortable with that, but for me, even with them knowing what was going on, still juggling that and trying to make sure I could kind of get to places before seeing patients, it's a struggle. It puts a lot of strain, a lot of overwhelm on us.
And while you're going through this journey, you mentioned that you did it alone. Were there
Mhm.
really no support services around you? And I guess my second question is, how accommodating was your workplace?
So it's, I think that there are support systems. We just don't know about it because we don't talk about it. What I found with time was that there was actually a really great online community of women, specifically some women physicians that were going through this. But until somebody told me about it years into my struggle, I had no idea. And it's not a conversation that comes up in medical school, residency. Um, Sometimes you see women having kids and maybe they struggled, maybe they didn't, but nobody talks about it. So there were really no obvious resources until I started digging for them. And in addition to that, it's not something that work talks about really either.
Mhm.
Once I broached the topic with my colleagues, I definitely had support. I mean, we all care about each other, right? We care about our human experience. People understand the importance of wanting to have a family if that's something you choose. But it wasn't like there was a worked in support system for time off or the coverage that you get with insurance. Some women don't have that at all. And we were lucky that we had some insurance coverage, but there's not a system that really seems to be in place to say, hey, this is something that's really common. I mean, actually 1 in 4 women physicians go through infertility. And so it's happening all around us, and yet we don't talk about it.
So let's transition now into your Kevin MD article, Normalizing Infertility Conversations in a Workplace. Now, for those who didn't read that article, can you just walk my audience through it?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing for me was just kind of bringing about that awareness that this is something that impacts a lot of women. And in the general public, it's about 1 in 8, and then miscarriage is 1 in 4, and actually women physicians are finding that it's about 1 in 4 too. And for so many of us to be struggling with it and not talk about it, it creates an environment of shame and anger and fear. And there's really nothing to be ashamed of. This is a medical diagnosis. And I think that by normalizing those conversations, it allows women to do what they need to do without having to feel like they're asking for permission or being judged. We don't have to say why you need a day off or why you might need to be a little bit late into work that day. We should be able to do this. And I don't want medicine to be a barrier for women to build their families if that's what they choose to do. And so I think that when we have these conversations and it just becomes like anything else in the medical field, women will be able to start advocating for themselves more without feeling that fear of what this means for my professional life.
So what would be a hypothetical scenario that you could illustrate where we can normalize infertility conversations either in the hospital or the clinic?
So I would really, to highlight it, I really think that we need to start talking about it earlier. I think that this needs to be something that is part of our medical education, whether that's in medical school and residency, ideally both. We need to know about our reproductive health and what it means, and like what are the statistics related to infertility, especially as it applies to women in medicine, and then what does it entail? I think kind of talking that through so women understand what their options are and that they're not all of a sudden blindsided when they're done with their training and are ready to, for that, right time to start having a family. So I think just by educating and bringing about awareness is huge. For me, I share my story, my specific story, because that's the way that I know. I mean, I'm not OB, I'm not REI, but for me, it's important to share my story. So I feel like at least maybe that helps one other woman feel like they're not alone. And that's not what we have to do. People don't have to share their specific story. So I think it's the education part, but if you do feel comfortable, you can share it. Because what I've found is that by sharing my story, women started reaching out to me and feeling like they at least had somewhere to go.
For those women who are going through medical school and residency or just are young attendings, what are some of the questions they should be asking during that journey?
I think understanding what's their insurance coverage when they're in training. So medical school and residency, what does that entail? Are they able to go and see a specialist and just have kind of a workup and understand like what their reproductive health is? I think that they should be asking, what does fertility treatment look like? What does this mean for me if I choose to wait to have children, which is totally okay. There's no one right or wrong time to start a family. But I think that people at least need to know what that could entail so they know how to balance it and have the right support system in place when it is time to go through that.
And from what you understand, the health insurance during medical school and residency, what is the typical coverage for infertility treatments?
I'm not sure about med school and residency in particular. I think there's a lot of differences statewide, and that there's a lot of insurance providers who can actually opt out of certain things. I'm in Illinois. We have decent coverage here. So, but if you're out of pocket, I mean, when you think about an IVF round, this can cost, like each round can cost $20,000+. And so if you don't have insurance coverage, that on top of your medical school loans in particular, again, for our specialties or our field, it's astounding, and it's not like one round gets you a child. What I think that a lot of the things when it comes to awareness and education is understanding that even if you struggle to get pregnant on your own, when you see a specialist, IVF is not some magical answer either. I mean, this can take years. For myself, it took, over 5 years to get my 2 boys. And we had to go through multiple IVF rounds, and we need to understand that this is something that if you do not have insurance coverage, you need to figure out, okay, how can I financially prepare for this? How do I make sure that this is not a barrier for me? And so I think just asking those types of questions of your programs is important, and eventually continuing to advocate on a wider scale for providing appropriate coverage for women. And that'll be something that hopefully will continue to change with time.
We're talking to Kate Hoppick. She is an internal medicine physician. She wrote the Kevin MD article, Normalizing Infertility Conversations in the Workplace. Kate, if there's something that you know now after your journey that you wish you knew back before, what would those few things be?
I think it would be just about educating myself and educating others around me. So anytime I learned something, I would want to make sure that I shared that with my colleagues, and really understanding that you are not defined by labels, whether that's doctor, mother, physician, infertility, any of those things. You're not defined by it. There's a lot to each of us, and I think it's important to have the right kind of support system in place to make sure that you don't lose yourself. You're not just in constant survival mode, and that you can really still live and enjoy what's happening around you despite your fertility.
And for those who are interested in looking for more information on fertility during their residency or medical training, what are some resources that you could recommend?
So I think reaching out to your local OB is really a great place to start, so you can understand kind of your own reproductive health. I think that that's really the first place to start, because once you understand that, then you can start to figure out what are those next steps and where should you go next. Is that another specialist? Is it maybe just online communities? There's a lot of online communities about support systems based off of different diagnoses. So really the resources are endless, but starting with your OB is a great place to start.
And my final question, what's your take-home message you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
That, you're not alone. I mean, this is something that is impacting thousands and thousands of women, and you're not alone. You have a support system. We're out there, we just have to make sure that we continue to support each other, be kind to each other, and lift each other up as we go through this. And that will, that'll speak volumes when we can make this, something that everybody is aware of.
And how can people reach you?
So my website is fertilityfound.com, and my Instagram is fertilityfound. And I just am trying to create a place where people and women really have just a support system, somebody who they can talk to. I'm coaching now. And so that's something that I think can really help. But they can reach out to me anytime if they have questions about my journey or anything else.
Kate, thank you so much for sharing your story, time, and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.